Welcome back to Box Office Maniacs, and today I'm out here on location, and it's St. Louis's graveyard, and it's called the Bellefontaine Graveyard, and this place is incredible. So that's why I came out here to do a special review for a special movie of Night of the Living Dead, the Criterion collection. Okay, so what I'm standing in front of right now is Anheuser-Busch's crypt, and I guess everybody knows who Anheuser-Busch is, and they're from St. Louis, and this looks pretty cool. It's a pretty elaborate crypt, but you know what, I'm going to do a review of all of this separately so you guys can see all these amazing stuff that's out here. But right now I am here to talk about this amazing movie and transfer from Criterion. So the only time they ever really used to show this was on TV, and it was usually like the PBS station or something, and it was all just grainy and lines going through it, and you couldn't see it, and it was dark, and it was terrible looking. And up until, I guess now, I think they released this a dozen times, but Criterion did such an incredible job cleaning this movie up. This movie has never, ever looked as good as it does right now. So, like I said, this is incredible looking. And it just gives you the perspective of how amazing this film actually is, for the fact that only just a handful of people made this movie. It was basically made by just students who wanted to go out and make a movie on the weekend, and that's literally what this is. So if you're not familiar with Night of the Living Dead, which I don't know how you would not be, but the basic story is this woman shows up to a graveyard with her brother to put some flowers on the grave, and while she's there, he gets attacked by a zombie. She takes off running and gets into this farmhouse, and that's basically where the rest of the movie takes place, is this little abandoned farmhouse. And the story is spectacular with this. It's so good. After all these years, it still lives up to the hype probably when it first got released, because it's one of those movies that when you're watching it, it doesn't feel like it's an old movie, like it could have been filmed yesterday. The acting in this movie too is outstanding. From all the actors in this film, everybody in this movie is really good. So as for movies go, this is still a classic. Like I said, you don't get much better than this, and you don't get much better than this version of it. This is probably the absolute best version of this movie I have ever seen. And in fact, and I'm going to say right now, it's probably my favorite Blu-ray of the year. It's that good. I don't have that many Criterion films. I probably have maybe 5, maybe even 6 or 7, something like that. But after watching this, I have become a huge fan of Criterion now. And I wish they would actually take their time and release more classic horror films like this. So yeah, I have become a new fan all over again because this film is so good. And again, just the transfer of this is like, it looks brand new. I mean, I've never seen anything look like this actually from an old film, and they clean this movie up so incredibly. It's like, literally, it's like watching the film for the first time again. If you've never seen this movie, and it's one of those films that for whatever reason you just never got a chance to watch, this is your opportunity to see this. And if you're seeing this for the first time, I envy you to see it in this incredible condition. It's basically what started the whole zombie craze, is this film. If it wasn't for Night of the Living Dead, I'm sure something else would have come out and started the whole zombie thing, but we were lucky enough to have this one to catapult, you know, the whole zombie craze. Okay, so that's enough talking about this incredible film. We really have to get to the extras because this thing is loaded with extras. So let's dig in to the extras right now. Well, I made it back into my studio after my little field trip out there in the Bellefontaine Cemetery, and I loved it out there. I think it was just the coolest place. It was interesting filming on location. I don't think I've ever done that before. I believe that was the first time I've done that. And it was kind of cool, except for the cars driving by and the people are going, you know, kind of staring at me, you know, standing there holding this here, Night of the Living Dead. But, you know, it was fun, and there's more to come from the Bellefontaine Cemetery. That's not all. So I just want to give you a little teaser there that later on this month, and maybe in another week, maybe in this week, maybe next week, I don't know, whatever week is going to be posted, there's more to come from that cemetery. Alright, so there is a lot, and I mean a lot of extras to get to on this disc, so I gotta just jump right in. Okay, first of all, it's the commentary. Now, as you've been watching some of these videos this month, you realize that Vince or I, or if I'm just doing it by myself, I don't really have the time to sit and watch or listen to the audio. If you have a movie and it has like 4 different audio tracks, you're just going to have to watch the movie 4 different times. So that's 4 or 5 hours of your day that you're watching the film just to listen to the audio commentary, plus another 3 or 4 days to get through just to get through the extras. So I actually got this. This is not, it came out this year, but it came out really early this year. And that's when I actually started the commentary, watching the commentary on this. So that's how I actually got through the commentary. And I just finished, in October now, I just finished the extras. So I probably started this in January, February, whenever this movie came out. And now I just finished in October. So it tells you, give you a little bit of length of how long it took me to get through this. Not that there's that many hours of extras on here, it's just that I have limited time to actually try to watch all of this. So the first commentary here is by George Romero, Carl Hardman, Mary Eastman, and co-writer John Russo. And it was recorded back in 1994. And that's one really good thing here about this Criterion collection is when you click on an extra, a little panel will slide over and it'll tell you when it was recorded, who's in it, and what it's about before you even watch it, and that's really impressive. I like that. Now here is just a group of people who was in this film, who made the film, and you can tell they were just in a room talking and enjoying the film. And this is a great commentary. It's really informative, it's very funny, and they sit there and they point out all the mistakes that they made while making the movie. And even if you've seen this movie a dozen times, you may not notice a light stand that's sitting there in the corner. You're like, oh yeah, right there, that's the stand for the lights. You see it sitting right there in the frame of the camera. I never noticed it until they pointed it out. Stuff like that is really good, and it's a really entertaining commentary. One thing I've always wondered about, because I know this movie was so low budgeted, it's like, how did they get this house? Where did they get this house? And whoever owned this house, how did they allow them to board all the windows and everything up? Well, actually, this is an old farmhouse that was going to get demolished. And they found the people who owned this farmhouse and said, hey, you know, we're making a movie. Do you mind if we come to the farmhouse and film there? And whoever owned it, I guess, was like, oh, no, whatever. Go ahead and film there. We don't care. We're going to tear it down anyway. Now, I guess they probably wish they would not have. It was really fun to hear all about the guerrilla filmmaking in this commentary. I mean, it's just so much on here, and that's why, because I love the movie so much, I didn't know much about the making of it, so that's kind of why I wanted to watch the actual people like George Romero, who made the film, talk about it. And I figured it would probably get repeated, stuff would probably be repeated later on in the extras, and really, it wasn't repeated that much, which makes these commentaries really good to listen to. Okay, so the next commentary has quite a lot of people on here. I'm going to try to read them all off here. Russell Stinger, who is a production manager, Vincent Cervinsky, and Judith O'Day, S. William Hintzman, Kyra something I can't read, because I can't read my own handwriting, and Keith Wayne. Now, I don't really know who all those people are. I think those were some of the people that were in the film, probably. And this, again, is a great commentary. And it does get repeated a little bit of what was in the first one, sort of like the scene in the beginning of it where they show her car. Right after the cemetery sequence, her car rolls down the hill and it's hit, a tree hits it and it scrapes the side of the car. The reason they did that was because the car in real life actually got into an accident while they were filming. And I think the car belonged to somebody's mother there on the set. And somebody ran into her, or she ran into something, so now they had a big dent on the side of the car, and they had already used it in the previous scene. They're like, okay, now we have a big dent. So they actually stuck the scene in there where the car hit the tree and put the dent in there. And there we go, you know, instant special effects. And I mean, they talk about it in the first commentary, and they also talk about here. So there's a little bit of repeating going on there. And like I said, this was such a low budget film that they actually went to Goodwill and they bought $50 worth of furniture there at Goodwill. And I think they even said they took some of the stuff out of their garbage, out of the trash, stuff that was in the alley, because this farmhouse they were in, that they were filming in, didn't have any furniture. So they had to furnish it to make it look like somebody was living there. So they went to Goodwill and spent $50 and got all this furniture, threw it in a truck, went back there, and put it all around the house so it looked like somebody was living there. So also on disc 1, we actually have what is, I guess, considered a work print of Night of the Living Dead. But it's actually called The Night of Anubis. Because originally the movie was supposed to be called Night of the Flesh Eaters, and it was named that all the way up until the point where they found out that there was somebody going to sue them, because I think the band was named that, Night of the Flesh Eaters, or another movie was named that, and they're like, hey, you can't name your movie this because we already have that name. So then George Romero is like, okay, well, let's come up with a name that nobody else is going to pick. So they picked Night of Anubis. And I think Anubis was some sort of Egyptian god that had something to do with the dead. I'm not sure. But that's why they named it this. And it comes up on the screen. It says Night of Anubis. And again, what I also didn't realize was when they make these films, or at least when they made them way back then, they have the actual reel of the film. And I don't remember what size the reel it was. But then they have the people who process the film make them another reel for them to edit on. So that's what this is. This is the original edit reel of the movie. So they can make splices and they can move stuff, and they don't have to worry about the quality or scratching, and they put the sound in there. So this is like the work print, the test print. They actually tape all this stuff together and look through it and like, okay, this is how we want our movie, and then take the actual footage that they filmed and cut it the exact same way so it doesn't get damaged. So that's what this is. This is the work print. And there's a lot of scenes here that weren't in the movie, or there were longer scenes that they added and stuff, so it's really great extra. Okay, so disc 2 has just about all the other extras. So disc 2 actually has the big load of extras here. The first one is called Light in the Darkness. And it's from 2007, and Frank Darabont, who you might recognize the name because he directed a lot of Stephen King stuff, he was on here, and Robert Rodriguez from a bunch of horror films, and Guillermo was on here, and they were all talking about how this movie influenced them when they were growing up, and how it basically influenced them now still when they're filmmakers. And it's a really good extra. So next up is Dailies, and this is actually sort of behind the scenes footage from the movie, and it's pretty cool. It's really excellent, actually. And it just shows stuff, what was happening around the scene and people walking, and then it's a bunch of behind-the-scenes footage. Okay, next up is Learning from Scratch. Now, again, never knew any of this stuff, but George Romero and John Russo and a bunch of other people, there's like 5 people in the company, made a company called The Latent Image. And they made TV commercials because they really wanted to make a movie, but they didn't have the money to make a movie. So they made their own company, they created their own company, and they actually went out and filmed commercials for people. And these commercials, they show some on here, and they're really funny, but they're really inventive, they're super well filmed. And there was like a Clorox commercial, I think it was Clorox, and it was about this miniature sub that goes into this dryer and is looking for something in the dryer. It's like a mini sub. It's really interesting. And then there was another one about Duke beer, and this guy was out mowing his grass, and he needed his woman to get him some beer because he was hot. And the commercial they showed they were great. They're really inventive. And they did these so they could build up the money to actually make a feature film. So by the time they got the money together to make Night of the Living Dead, they were already sort of established filmmakers, because they were filming these commercials on the very cheap and very quickly, and this is how they learned how to make Night of the Living Dead so quickly. So now we have what's called TV newsreel, and apparently somebody on set filmed this footage, and according to the little slide out that comes out, says this is the only known behind the scenes footage that ever existed from Night of the Living Dead. However, the Dailies was also behind the scenes footage, so I'm not really sure what they were talking about here. But this one is just a bunch of people standing around. I mean, literally, that's all it is. There's not a whole lot to this. It's interesting to watch, but it's sort of like, you know, they're waiting to be filmed, and these guys were just standing there with their guns, and just, you know, there wasn't a whole lot going on here. So now we have Walking Like the Dead. I gotta tell you, I absolutely love this extra. I think it's probably one of my favorite extras on this whole disc. And it's about all the locals who are on here, and they're just talking about how they got picked to be extras in this movie. Stuff like this would never happen today. It's the one woman says that her and her husband are just sitting out on their backyard in the chairs, sitting there, I guess, enjoying nature or whatever they were doing. And here comes a woman pulling up in a car, and she gets out and walks up to him, and she says, "Hey, you want to be in a movie?" And the woman's like, "My husband says no, but I said, hey, that sounds like a pretty fun thing. Let's go do that." So they basically took these people, put them in a trailer, got makeup on them, put them out in the field, and they were instantly in the movie as zombies. And they didn't even know what they were filming or what movie it was. It's like, isn't that crazy? So now we have Tones of Terror. And this is also a really good extra. Now, like I said, they don't really repeat themselves that much, which I'm really impressed by, because a lot of these discs that come out and they have, you look at the back of it, you're like, oh my god, look at the extras take up half the back of the cover here. And you're like, well, alright, you know, they're going to start repeating themselves because you can't have this many extras without it repeating. Arrow is really bad about that. Arrow will give you 3, 4, or 5 days of extras, but out of those 3 or 4 or 5 days, you might only get 1 day of it not repeating itself. I can't talk anymore. It is about 3 o'clock in the morning when I'm filming this, so I just want to let you know that my voice is completely gone. So I'm trying to get through this here. All right, so yeah, this is a really interesting extra for the fact that they didn't actually have music in this film. There was no one out there composing sound for the movie. There was a library where they could get the music from, and they had to use the music they had. So, like, for example, the music that George Romero used, they show the disc, or they show the list of what music was, and it's all from science fiction films. So if you watch all these bad science fiction films from the 50s, and you hear this whoo, you know, music, that's the same music he put in here, but he put it into it as a much better effect, and you're watching it, you don't even realize it's sort of a spacey sounding music just because of how he used it. And he actually would use the whole tracks too, because a lot of times when you watch these old films, they'll play a little bit of music, then switch to something else, and switch to something else, and switch to something else, so you never get to hear the whole track. This, he just let it play. He just let the whole thing play out, and it made it sound much better by doing that. So now we have limitations into virtues, and I thought this was going to be a pretty dumb extra, or boring at least. Nope, this is another really good one, and it shows you the limitations that George Romero had while filming, while making this movie. And he had this gigantic camera that was on a tripod, and the tripod could either go up or it could go down. I don't even think it had a tilt back and forth. So it might have, but it was one of those you couldn't move all around. It's either up or down, so, or back and forth, and that's all you could do. And there was very little that he could do with the camera. And he had I can't remember what like a balloon, or I can't remember what they called it. It was this gigantic thing that attached to the top of the camera that synced up the sound. So anytime somebody was talking, he had to keep the camera on the tripod, because he said it weighed like 80 pounds with this thing sitting on top of it. So he couldn't film any sort of the action sequences or anything with it, because he wouldn't be able to carry it around. So when you actually see the camera moving around, you don't really hear that much dialogue. He puts the sound effects and stuff in later, but as for dialogue, he couldn't carry the camera, so he was very limited as to what shots he filmed and what parts he put the dialogue in and what parts he didn't. So by doing that, I think it makes a director more creative, because you have to actually think about what you're filming. So yeah, it was really a great extra. So now we have a extra called Tomorrow, and it was filmed in 1979. This is a fascinating blast from the past right here. This is a really interesting time capsule, just to take a look back in time to see what TV used to be like back in 1979. I'd never heard of this show called Tomorrow. But whoever this guy was that was interviewing George Romero, and the other guy that was on there was the guy who directed Phantasm. I think his name is Don Carleone, something like that. His name's Don, I know that. And so he's sitting there, and George Romero's sitting next to him, and the other guy's standing there, sitting in it, and the other guy's sitting in the chair. And it's real low budget. I mean, of course, 1970s. It's like they're sitting like just in a lounge chairs in front of a cardboard setup behind them. But one thing I kind of got annoyed with was the guy that was interviewing him kept talking about how stupid Frankenstein was and how stupid Dracula, the original Frankenstein, the original Dracula. Well, these are just silly movies now. They're just funny. They're not comedy. They're almost like He's like, they're almost like comedies now. You watch them and they're just silly. No, they're not silly. They're not comedies. They're not funny. They are still classics of cinema. But he just kept saying, oh, compared to all the stuff now, they're just goofy fun and stuff. I was like, what? And you can kind of tell that George Romero and Don was getting a little annoyed about it. Because Don's like, well, I still enjoy those movies. I still think they're good. I still think they're scary. George Romero is just sitting there smoking. The smoke's just going everywhere. And then all of a sudden, the interviewer's smoking. So they got smoke just filling this whole entire room. Don doesn't smoke, I guess, because he wasn't smoking on there. But again, it's weird to see that, because you would never see, somebody sitting there smoking, interviewing somebody today. It's just weird. But it's actually good interviews. They actually talk about the filming process, and Don talks about how he filmed. It was his first movie. I think Phantasm just came out, and George Romero's Dawn of the Dead was just coming out. So he was actually talking more about Dawn of the Dead and Phantasm in this interview. But it was good. It was really good and interesting. Okay, so now we have Higher Learning, and this is George Romero with some guy, and they are at a screening of Night of the Living Dead, and George is sitting in the chair, and he's answering a bunch of questions from this guy, and he does get a lot of questions from the crowd, and a lot of the stuff he talks about is the copyright issues for Night of the Living Dead, because he did not put the little C in there, because when it was called The Flesh Eaters, he had the copyright symbol, but then when they actually redid the title, they didn't put the copyright symbol in there, so therefore it wasn't copyrighted. So everybody just kind of stole his movie, and it was being resold and redistributed without him making any money. And he also talked about Dwayne, the black guy in the film, that when he wrote the script, he just wrote it as, people. He wasn't seeing them as black and white people, and when Dwayne came in to read for it, he's like, that's it, this is the character, and he didn't change the character at all. And I think back when they made this movie, it was very segregated stuff back in the South, where you couldn't, a black person couldn't drink out of the same drinking fountain as, the white people could, and stuff like that. You couldn't use the same bathroom. This stuff was actually still going on when Night of the Living Dead came out, which is pretty scary to think of. And now to have like this hero that comes into this movie who happens to be black, who nobody acknowledges that in the film or even says anything about it, was groundbreaking back then. It was crazy. And then he said, like, a lot of the places in the South wouldn't even show this. Because of that, they would not show the movie, which is just, it just blows my mind to think about that. So now we have a interview with Dwayne Jones, the guy I was just telling you about, and this was back in 1987. They recorded this, it said on a Sunday afternoon, and it was, I think, 7 or 8 months before he died. He died like 7 or 8 months later after he did the audio, and this is all just an audio recording of him. And he's an interesting guy, I can say. I don't know if I would particularly get along with this guy because he was just seemed. I mean, he starts the interview and he talks about how he was grateful to be in the movie, and he was very grateful to be in it. And he's like, I don't want to come out here to sound like I'm sort of this pompous a-hole or anything, but he kind of comes off that way a little bit, I can tell you. Because he don't want to ever talk about the movie. He's like, I mean, I don't mind people coming up to me once in a while and talking to me, but, don't ask me the same questions. He's like, I've been asked the same question 200 times, and I'm not answering any more questions. I'm not talking to people. Then they asked him, did you watch the other Dawn of the Dead movies? And he's like, no. In fact, I've never watched another Romero film. He's like, I seen this, and that was it. I've never seen another Romero film. Stuff like that, I'm just like, okay, I mean, okay. It makes no sense to me, but all right. And then they asked him if he ever had a copy of it. And he's like, well, I have one copy of it because George Romero gave it to me because I was doing a fundraiser and they wanted to show the movie, and I didn't have a copy of it, so I had to go to George Romero's office, and he gave me a copy of the movie and said, just go ahead and keep it. And that's the only copy I ever have, and I've never even bought it. And he said he was in a restaurant with some friends, and he kept looking up to the TV. He said it was right around Halloween, they were showing Night of the Living Dead, and the friends were like looking at him, looking at the TV, and they're like, well, who is that guy on there? He looks familiar. And he just said he didn't say anything, he just sat there. And he's like, oh, I don't know, you know, basically. And they're like, oh, he's like, is that you? And so it looks a lot like you. And he's like, no, could be, maybe, I don't know. And he wouldn't tell him. He wouldn't tell him that was him in the movie. Just weird things like that. It's just like, I don't know. I don't get it, I guess. So next we have a interview with Judy Ridley, I think is her name. And this was from 1994. And she was the girlfriend of the guy that was in the movie. She was not the wife of the guy that's down in the basement. She was actually the girlfriend of the younger guy. She was really interesting, I guess. She was being interviewed by her boss, I think it was. I don't think that that woman was in the movie. But she was being interviewed by somebody who she used to be the secretary of this person she's interviewing. Because she said she got this job as a secretary, and then somehow she went from that to being in this movie. And she talks about, again, how low budget of this film was. She said that, you know, a lot of the people on set would drive home, but they would have to drive 30, 40 miles to get home. And then by the time they get home, they're so tired, you know. She said a lot of times she just fell asleep on the swing outside the house because she couldn't even make it inside the house. And she said George Lucas would get a sleeping bag and literally sleep on the floor of the house because he couldn't afford to go to an apartment or a hotel or rent anything out. So he just literally slept there at the farmhouse and never left the whole time he was filming. So the next one here is the last one. It's the weirdest one. It's the Venus probe. This is literally about 10 seconds long, and it's some sort of news footage of what this Venus probe found. I don't know. I don't really understand what it was I was watching, because it comes on and it goes off about that quick. So yeah, I don't really get this one that much. And the rest of this is the trailers, the radio spots, the behind the scenes production photos, or whatever else they have on here. So it's usually, the rest of the stuff is usually normal stuff. This is probably, so far, my favorite Blu-ray of the year. I think Criterion knocked it out with this one. I haven't bought anything that I've enjoyed watching as much as this, that I was impressed with as much as this, that I enjoyed the extras as much as this so far this year. We still got a lot more months to go, and a lot more horror month to go, so there might be something else that pops up that I will enjoy as much as this. So right now I'm saying this is it. If you are a fan of Night of the Living Dead and you never picked this up, don't hesitate. Go out and get it. Get on Amazon, get on whatever thing you get on to order this. Get it now. I'm going to give you the highest score that we have for the movie and for these extras. And of course, that is... So there you have it. There is my review on location for the very first time for Box Office Maniacs and Horror Month of 2018, taking a look at this amazing classic. It's a classic movie, it's a classic release, and if you are any kind of fan of this film, make sure you get this copy of it, because you will not be disappointed. And as always, we need as many Maniacs as humanly possible, especially during Horror Month. This is our big month, people. If you love horror movies, we still do them all year long, but this is the big month. This is where we do all the horror movies for 31 straight days. So if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe, because we love all of our Maniacs and we love hearing from you. So make sure you hit some of the comments up down there and put some comments down there and write some comments, or just leave comments, because we love hearing from you. So until next time, thank you for watching Horror Month 2018! The only time they ever really used to...
Car.